I would like this young lady this is her first job, I would like her to do a little homework. Because she said something yesterday that really pissed me off. And that was, she said, there will be no wokeness here.
Oh, yeah.
Let me explain something to you. Because without that wokeness, you might not have that job.
They're prepared. And you know why they're prepared? Because they're trying to play gotcha.
Yep.
So she played gotcha with them. She checkmated them.
She came in there with that fucking...
In today's chaotic media landscape, a story like this isn't just news. It's a full-blown cultural moment. When Karoline Leavitt, a rising conservative powerhouse, decided she had enough of The View's casual smear campaigns, she didn't whimper on social media or beg for airtime. She went nuclear. A $500 million defamation lawsuit squarely aimed at the queens of daytime outrage. And watching from the sidelines, grinning like a kid in a candy store, was Joe Rogan, the balding oracle of common sense, microphone in hand, ready to dismantle the hypocrisy with surgical precision. Karoline Leavitt isn't just another political commentator. She's a force, young, unfiltered, and dangerous in the way that terrifies legacy media. Her lawsuit didn't just allege character assassination, it declared war on the very tactics that shows like The View have used for years to silence dissent. The moment the papers were filed, it was as if someone had dropped a lit match into a fireworks factory. Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, Sunny Hostin, names synonymous with smug dismissal and hollow moralizing, found themselves on the defensive for once. And Joe Rogan, he didn't miss a beat. From his podcast fortress, Rogan wasted no time. His analysis was brutally honest. That lady, that new press secretary, she's a gangster. Not gangster in the cliched sense, but in the way that matters today. Prepared, relentless, calculated. The kind of preparation that only comes when you know you're stepping into a minefield laid by those who'd rather see you destroyed than debated. Watching Leavitt handle The View with the finesse of a chess grandmaster made Rogan's admiration pour out in real time. This wasn't luck, this was war. The View had spent years masquerading as a forum for progressive thought. But somewhere along the line, it morphed into a gladiatorial arena for ideological purity tests. Agree or be devoured. They didn't just challenge Leavitt, they labeled her dangerous, unfit, an agent of chaos simply for aligning with the wrong side. It was a strategy older than television itself. Demonize what you can't defeat. But Leavitt flipped the script. She didn't storm off set. She didn't pen an angry op-ed. She lawyered up. Joe Rogan saw the beauty in it instantly. In a world where cancel culture has weaponized outrage for ratings, where being offended is currency, Leavitt chose a different path. She chose accountability, legal, public, and devastating. And in doing so, she exposed The View for what it's become: less a talk show and more a daytime tribunal of one-sided condemnation. This move by Leavitt was more than bold. It was revolutionary. She understood that the only way to combat manufactured outrage was with undeniable facts and an ironclad resolve. Joe Rogan celebrated her strategy, pointing out that real change doesn't happen through hashtags or viral tweets. It happens when someone has the guts to say, enough. And Leavitt did, not just for herself, but for everyone who's ever been slandered by a media machine that operates without consequence. Rogan dove deeper, dissecting how The View had become a caricature of itself. What was once a platform for spirited debate had devolved into an echo chamber where dissenting voices are not only unwelcome, but aggressively vilified. Joy Behar's theatrical outrage, Whoopi Goldberg's sanctimonious detachment, and Sunny Hostin's legal posturing became emblematic of a broader cultural rot, one where virtue signaling replaced actual virtue, and shouting down your opponent became preferable to understanding them. The stakes are bigger than one lawsuit. They're about the future of public discourse. Joe Rogan emphasized that when platforms like The View label political opposition as dangerous, they aren't just attacking individuals, they're corroding the foundations of free speech itself. And Karoline Leavitt's lawsuit is a sharp, stinging reminder that there's a price to pay for abandoning journalistic integrity in favor of cheap partisan point scoring. While mainstream media outlets scrambled to spin the story, Joe Rogan continued to champion the necessity of open dialogue and rigorous debate. He reminded his audience that disagreement is not danger, that questioning mainstream narratives is not conspiracy, and that standing firm against a mob, even one dressed in designer clothes and daytime Emmy nominations, is a revolutionary act in a time of manufactured consensus. The ripple effects of Karoline's lawsuit were immediate, not just headlines, shockwaves. Across newsrooms and social media, commentators scrambled to spin the story, painting Leavitt as everything from opportunistic to downright delusional. Yet none of their attempts could mask the growing realization that the old rules of engagement had changed. No longer would media giants be able to casually crush reputations without expecting serious blowback. Leavitt had fired the opening salvo in what could very well become a new era of accountability for the commentariat class. Joe Rogan, ever the cultural barometer, didn't just applaud Leavitt's guts, he dissected the psychology behind it. On his podcast, he riffed on the absurdity of mainstream figures like Joy Behar clutching their pearls, insisting they were simply offering opinions while simultaneously wielding massive influence that can make or break careers. When you control the narrative and silence opposition, Rogan said, you're not giving opinions, you're shaping reality. And for years, no one dared to challenge that power. Until now. What made Rogan's critique even sharper was how he exposed the double standards at play. Imagine, he mused, if a conservative panel had baselessly mocked a young progressive woman on national television. There would be outrage, marches, corporate apologies, careers would be ended overnight. But when the ideological tables were turned, the same media figures who championed justice and equity suddenly wanted immunity for their words. Rogan laughed at the hypocrisy, but he also warned of its dangers. A society where justice is selective isn't justice at all. It's tyranny with a laugh track. Meanwhile, The View tried to ride out the storm with their usual arsenal: performative outrage, veiled condescension, and desperate appeals to their dwindling moral authority. Sunny Hostin attempted legal acrobatics to downplay Leavitt's claims. Whoopi Goldberg waxed poetic about free speech while conveniently forgetting that free speech includes the right to sue for defamation when lines are crossed. And Joy Behar, well, she did what she does best: confuse volume for substance, hurling insults disguised as jokes while the walls around her ideological fortress crumbled. Joe Rogan wasn't just observing this from afar. He was documenting a cultural implosion. With every mockery and legal threat, The View unintentionally confirmed the very criticisms that Leavitt and others had been voicing for years, that daytime television had become less about informing audiences and more about indoctrinating them. As the days passed, Karoline Leavitt's move began to look less like a desperate legal ploy and more like a strategic masterstroke. Public opinion started to shift. People who normally tuned out political squabbles were suddenly paying attention. They weren't just seeing another lawsuit. They were seeing a young woman who refused to be bullied, standing up to a machine that had steamrolled so many others before her. And Joe Rogan made sure no one missed that bigger picture. On his podcast, Rogan pointed out how rare it is to see someone in Leavitt's position actually fight back, especially against an entrenched institution like ABC and its daytime darling, The View. It takes resources. It takes resilience. And most of all, it takes the willingness to weather the storm of public backlash. Not everyone is built for that. But Karoline Leavitt? She was built different. The lawsuit exposed not just The View's biases, but their vulnerabilities. Their public relations machine kicked into overdrive, issuing carefully worded statements and leaning on friendly media outlets to spin the narrative. But it was too late. The internet had already exploded with clips, memes, and commentary, most of it gleefully highlighting the irony. The self-appointed guardians of truth and decency were now the ones being dragged into court for alleged character assassination. Joe Rogan, with his unique blend of humor and insight, captured the moment perfectly. He joked that watching The View panic was like watching a henhouse realize the fox they mocked had just lawyered up. No dramatic music, no Hollywood scripts, just real-life consequences unfolding live and unfiltered. And his audience, numbering in the millions, loved every second of it. Meanwhile, Leavitt remained composed. She wasn't giving tearful interviews or playing the victim. She was doing what few had dared to do before: hold powerful media figures accountable in a way that couldn't be edited out, spun, or laughed off. And every day the lawsuit remained active, it served as a reminder that the old media monopoly on narrative control was over. Joe Rogan made sure to hammer that point home, episode after episode. In his signature style, Rogan also reminded his listeners that the broader fight wasn't just about Leavitt or The View. It was about every institution that believes it's above reproach. It's about the shifting sands of power, where podcasts now rival primetime shows and independent voices challenge corporate megaphones. It's about how platforms like his are carving out spaces where real conversations happen, messy, complicated, and free from the heavy hand of corporate censorship. As Joe Rogan peeled back the layers of this unfolding drama, he made another critical observation, something the mainstream media would rather the public overlook. The View wasn't just lashing out because they felt attacked. They were lashing out because their control was slipping. For decades, legacy media had operated with impunity. They could define the narratives, destroy reputations, and pivot away from any accountability with a simple change of topic. But now, with independent media exploding, podcasts, YouTube, streaming platforms, the old gatekeepers found themselves vulnerable. And Karoline Leavitt's lawsuit was more than a legal challenge. It was a metaphorical battering ram against the fortified. Walls of legacy influence. Joe laughed about it openly. They're not upset because she sued, he said. They're upset because they thought they were untouchable. And in many ways, that was the most threatening thing of all. If Karoline won, or even if she just made enough noise, it would set a precedent that the cultural elites could no longer smear and sneer without expecting serious, tangible pushback. In typical Rogan fashion, he connected the dots for his listeners. He pointed out how similar patterns were happening across other industries: comedians pushing back against cancel culture, musicians calling out corporate censorship, athletes refusing to toe the political line. It wasn't isolated, it was systemic. And Karoline Leavitt's lawsuit was just another flashpoint in a much bigger cultural war brewing beneath the surface. Meanwhile, The View tried to maintain the facade. Joy Behar continued with her sarcastic monologues. Whoopi attempted to diffuse the tension with her world-weary wisdom. Sunny Hostin leaned harder into legal jargon, trying to sound authoritative without saying anything of substance. But the cracks were showing. Their laughter seemed a little more forced. Their jokes a little more strained. Their confidence a little more hollow. Joe Rogan, of course, had no sympathy. "You don't get to be the bully for years," he said, and then cry foul the first time someone punches back. And with every episode, every clip, every viral moment, he helped turn Leavitt's legal battle into a symbol of rebellion, a rallying cry for anyone who's ever been told to sit down, shut up, and accept the narrative without question. As the cultural tides shifted, it became clear that Karoline Leavitt wasn't standing alone. Across social media, commentators, influencers, and independent journalists began to rally behind her, seeing in her fight a reflection of their own frustrations. It wasn't just about partisan politics anymore, it was about resisting a system that had grown too arrogant, too detached from the very people it claimed to represent. Joe Rogan captured this sentiment perfectly. He reminded his audience that the mainstream media's biggest fear isn't lawsuits or public backlash, it's losing relevance. Once people realize they don't need you to get the truth, Rogan said, your power is gone. And that's exactly what was happening. People were tuning out the polished, sanitized broadcasts of corporate media and turning instead to real conversations, messy as they might be, where authenticity mattered more than optics. Meanwhile, The View doubled down, perhaps sensing that retreat was not an option. They pivoted to painting themselves as victims, suggesting that the lawsuit was an attack on free speech itself. But Rogan dismantled that argument with surgical precision. Free speech, he argued, does not protect defamation. It does not grant immunity for falsehoods paraded as facts under the guise of entertainment. There's a line, and Karoline Leavitt's lawsuit was about making sure that line was respected. The broader public began to see the cracks in The View's defense. Clips circulated widely, showing the hypocrisy, the contradictions, the blatant double standards. And each time another clip went viral, the cultural armor protecting daytime television's grand dames grew thinner. Joe Rogan joked that at this point, The View was less a talk show and more like a live-action cautionary tale about what happens when power is left unchecked for too long. Karoline Leavitt remained a pillar of calm strength. No screaming matches, no self-pity, just quiet, unrelenting action, a strategy that resonated with an audience tired of performative outrage and empty theatrics. Her choice to fight in court rather than in the court of public opinion showed a level of maturity and tactical brilliance that even her fiercest critics had to respect. Joe Rogan saw the inevitable unfolding in real time. He compared it to a house of cards, delicately built on selective outrage and ideological purity, now shaking violently because someone had dared to question its foundations. Each passing week without a resolution, each viral moment highlighting the view's hypocrisy, was another gust of wind knocking at that fragile structure. Rogan, true to form, didn't let up. He laughed about how absurd the situation had become. They spent years building this idea that if you disagree with them, you're dangerous. Now someone's finally called them out and they're acting like it's the end of the world, he said with a wry grin. His listeners understood. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about basic fairness, about refusing to let powerful media figures continue operating without accountability. Even as mainstream outlets tried to minimize the lawsuit's importance, independent voices kept it alive. Podcasters, YouTubers, and social media commentators dissected every development, turning Karoline Leavitt's lawsuit into a rallying point for a growing cultural movement. It was bigger than any single episode of The View. It was a shot across the bow of an entire industry that had forgotten its responsibility to the truth. Behind the scenes, the pressure mounted. Legal teams scrambled, PR advisors issued tightly scripted statements, and executives quietly wondered if their aging golden goose was becoming more of a liability than an asset. Joe Rogan highlighted the irony. A show that had spent years weaponizing outrage was now drowning in it. Karoline's refusal to back down showed that there was a new playbook in town, one that didn't rely on viral clips or fleeting outrage, but on tangible, lasting consequences. Her lawsuit wasn't just a legal challenge, it was a cultural declaration. You cannot destroy reputations for sport and expect no response. And through it all, Joe Rogan continued to laugh, comment, and cheer from his digital pulpit. Not because he hated The View, but because he understood the bigger picture. This was about restoring balance, about forcing the once untouchable to answer for their actions, about reminding the world that influence, no matter how vast, does not place you above the truth. As the narrative continued to unfold, Joe Rogan began framing Karoline Leavitt's lawsuit not just as an isolated event, but as a spark in a much larger fire. He spoke passionately about the cultural shift happening beneath the surface, a rebellion against the curated outrage and manufactured consent that had long dominated traditional media. Each time, The View hosts tried to dismiss the lawsuit or paint themselves as martyrs, they only amplified the very criticisms they were trying to avoid. Every defensive statement, every forced chuckle, every half-hearted attempt at deflection became fresh ammunition for Rogan and countless others, who were eager to point out the crumbling facade. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt remained steady. No grandstanding, no emotional press conferences, just a clear, methodical pursuit of justice. Her strategy resonated deeply with a public exhausted by theatrics and desperate for authenticity. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was challenging the very idea that some voices deserve platforms while others deserve to be silenced. Rogan emphasized this point over and over again. This isn't just about a lawsuit, he said, leaning into the mic with intensity. It's about who gets to tell the story, who gets to define reality. For years, the answer had been obvious: the legacy media. But now, with the rise of podcasts, independent creators, and alternative platforms, that monopoly was breaking, and they didn't know how to handle it. As the lawsuit gained traction, Rogan painted a vivid picture of the future, a world where media giants were held to the same standards they so ruthlessly applied to everyone else, a world where slander had consequences, where platforms couldn't hide behind laughter and applause tracks, a world where the truth mattered more than the narrative. In the end, Joe Rogan didn't just celebrate Karoline Leavitt's courage, he celebrated what it represented: a cultural awakening, a refusal to accept that power and influence give you a free pass to destroy others without accountability, a movement toward a new media landscape, one built not on conformity, but on fearless, honest dialogue. And as Rogan's laughter echoed across millions of downloads, one thing became clear: whether or not Karoline wins every dollar she's seeking, she's already changed the game. And The View? Well, they're still sitting there, clutching their coffee mugs, wondering how it all went so wrong. If you're tired of curated outrage and ready for real conversations that challenge the mainstream, don't just watch from the sidelines, subscribe, stay informed, and join the movement that's reshaping media from the ground up.